Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to be continuing in 2 Chronicles tonight. So if you have a Bible and you'd like to follow along, that's a good place for you to be heading, 2 Chronicles. Perhaps some of you may recall a very popular video that made the rounds in 2012 featuring this young boy who went by the title Kid President. This is the boy right here, Robbie Novak, who played the role of Kid President in this video. Robbie was 8 years old at the time, and he gave this little pep talk to America about being less apathetic, less divided, less angry about things, and in his words, just be awesome instead. That video, wasn't much to it, was viewed almost 50 million times by people in America. And even today, 10 years later, when Robbie Novak goes about his daily life, he can hardly go anywhere without somebody recognizing him as the Kid President from those videos. So apparently, I guess, people in America seemed pretty interested in the idea of having a cute young boy be the leader of their country back in 2012. Well, tonight, as we get into Chronicles, we're going to meet the original Kid President, the real-life one, who was, in fact, younger than even young 8-year-old Robbie Novak when he actually became the king of the people of Israel. And that boy's name, of course, was Joash. We read about him in 2 Chronicles chapter 23 and 24. Well, actually start of 22, but mainly 23 and 24. So that's definitely where we're going to be spending our time tonight. Turning to chapter 24 might actually be a good place to start because it's there at the start of chapter 24 that we read this fact. Joash was 7 years old when he became king over Judah. And he reigned in Jerusalem for 40 years. Can you imagine? 7 years old, they name him the king of Judah. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. Now, we're only 2 verses into 2 Chronicles 24, but already we've gotten to the crux of the matter. Already we've sort of gotten to the point where we can really draw something from the life of Joash. As we read the rest of the story, I think you're going to see why. The heart of the lesson from Joash is this. No one, not a single person, gets to choose who they're born to. We all know that, of course, right? But nobody on this earth gets to choose who they're born to. Nobody gets to choose whether they're born into a family that is wealthy or poor, one that is loving or harsh, one that's around here or far away in the world, one that's in our time now or not. Nobody gets to choose who they're born to. But everybody has a choice about who they're going to honor. And to me, this is the lesson from the life of young Joash, the boy who was made king. And as verse 2 tells us, Joash made a very good choice about who to honor during the years of this fellow called Jehoiada the priest. Joash honored Jehoiada in the way that he lived his life during that priest's lifetime. And if we had started tonight just 2 chapters earlier in Chronicles, I think that you would see why. You see, it may look like Joash was born into a pretty cushy situation, right? He's 7 years old. He's the king of Judah. Can you imagine how many other children in Judah would have looked at Joash and thought, oh, if only I could be what he is. Oh, if only I had what Joash had. 7 years old, and he's king. But of course, if we dig a little deeper, and we actually think about what's going on for this young boy, maybe not so much envy. See, Joash was born into the line of the kings of Judah during a very bad time for kings of Judah. And I know it's been a couple of weeks since we've been in this study of 2 Chronicles because of some of the mission reports that we've had on Wednesday nights. But you've probably been picking up on this trend as we get further and further into this book of the Bible. Things have been kind of moving their way downhill with some of these kings. And Joash, he has a father and a grandfather who were kings. We looked at them both last time we were in this series. Their names may as well have been bad and worse because that's what they were like. One of them was named Jehoram. The other one was named Ahaziah. Jehoram was Joash's grandfather. Ahaziah is Joash's father. Both of them were told in 2 Chronicles 20, 21, and 22, both of them were really close with the people of Ahab, the king in the northern kingdom of Israel, and in his household. They listened to Ahab. Chronicles says, to their ruin. They listened to Ahab, and it ruined their life and their reign. If you go back and read those chapters, you'll see things do not go well at all for Jehoram or for Ahaziah. So Jehoram's Joash's grandfather. Ahaziah is Joash's father. But even worse than the two of them, if you can imagine, was Grandma. Joash's grandma was named Athaliah. We read about her in 2 Chronicles 22, verse 10 and following. And when Joash's grandmother, Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son, the king, was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of the house of Judah. As terrible as it gets, this grandmother, wanting to be queen and in charge herself, starts to actually kill off her whole family in order to protect her interests. And in the midst of all of this, there's this woman named Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram. And she took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered, and put him and his nurse in a bedroom. She hides Joash away. And because Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram and wife of whom? The priest Jehoiada, because she was Ahaziah's sister, she hid the child from Athaliah so that she could not kill him. So to recap this, I know we've got a lot of names going on here. Joash's grandfather was a wicked king and he died. Joash's father was a wicked king and he died. And then comes this grandmother who's going on a murderous spree through the rest of the family, trying to kill all the rest of them off so that she can be queen. But thankfully, Aunt Jehosheba steps in. This is Joash's aunt, and hides him away. She also happens to have a husband, a priest, Jehoiada. They hide Joash away. Think like when Moses' family hid him away to save him from danger. Think like when Jesus' family hides him away and flees to Egypt because Herod is coming to try and do away with Jesus. This woman, Jehosheba, saves the day, and Joash remained hidden, verse 12, with them at the temple of God for 6 years. The first 6 years of his life are in hiding, while Athaliah, his evil grandmother, ruled over the land. Now suddenly I'm thinking Joash's life doesn't look all that enviable anymore. By the time his 7th birthday rolls around and he becomes king, he's already been through a lot. He's already been through a lot of things that nobody would choose if they got to choose who they were born to. But of course, we don't get to choose that. We cannot choose who we're born to. But what can we choose? Who we honor. And right there in the midst of this dark and trying time, there is this priest, Jehoiada, who rises to the occasion. He proves to be worthy of honor. Jehoiada steps in for fatherless Joash and really steps in to be the father that he needs him to be, the leader he needs, the protector that he needs, but didn't get from his own family. In fact, as we now turn to the next chapter, chapter 23, we see that Jehoiada is the reason that 7-year-old Joash even gets to be king at all. So, verse 1 of that chapter says, in the 7th year, so that's Joash's 7th year, his 7th birthday year. In the 7th year, Jehoiada showed his strength. He made a covenant with the commanders of units of 100. So he gets all the army commanders from Judah together. In verse 3, Jehoiada said to them, the king's son shall reign. Why? As the Lord promised concerning the descendants of David. Because that's the kind of man that Jehoiada is. He's faithful to the promises of the Lord. He knows the covenant of God. He holds to it. And so he forms this plan with the army commanders. We don't have time to read the whole thing tonight. But it culminates, verse 11, in the unveiling of this boy who in fact is alive and nobody knew it. And so verse 11, Jehoiada and his sons brought out the king's son, Joash, and put the crown on him. They presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him and shouted, long live the king. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and cheering the king, she went to them at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance. And grandma shouted, treason, treason, like grandmas do. But who was on the side of Jehoiada and his plan? All the commanders of the army. They were already on board with this plan. So who ends up winning the day? Not Athaliah. She ends up going the way of Jehoram and Ahaziah, those wicked family members before them. And then check this out. Jehoiada then made a covenant that he, the people, and the king would be the Lord's people. And they start doing away with all the false idols. They set a hard reset on we're worshiping the Lord in the temple, just like the law of Moses taught us to do. And all the people, verse 21 of chapter 23, all the people of the land rejoiced. The city was calm because Athaliah had been slain with the sword. So now you know the backstory behind how this 7-year-old boy would turn out to be the king. And you also know why it's so significant that this boy did what was right all the years of Jehoiada, the priest. He did this because in Jehoiada, he had fallen into the arms of somebody who was worthy of honor. And though Joash may not have chosen the circumstances of his life, Joash did choose wisely to honor Jehoiada the priest. And man, I wish I could just go sit down right now, and that was the end of the story. How many twists and turns have we already had in this story? And here we've gotten such a happy note. But that last phrase of verse 2 is really a double-edged sword. Joash did what was right all the years of Jehoiada in Jehoiada's lifetime. And it was an honor to Jehoiada that he did so. Verse 4 through verse 14 list many of the great things that Joash does, bringing honor to God and to the one who saved him and raised him. Joash did what was right in Jehoiada's lifetime. But when Jehoiada passes away, tragically, Joash stops honoring Jehoiada, and he stops honoring the Lord that Jehoiada taught him to honor. So look at verse 17. We're in 2 Chronicles 24, verse 17. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came, and they paid homage to the king, and he, Joash, listened to them. But they were not people you ought to listen to. This is a major theme in 2 Chronicles. So, verse 18, they abandoned the temple of the Lord. Remember all that progress they made with Jehoiada? They abandoned it, the God of their ancestors. They start worshiping idols again. They worship the Asherah poles. Remember how they did away with the idols? Now they're back doing that again. And because of their guilt, God's anger came on Judah and Jerusalem. So what's God going to do? Well, God sends prophets to the people. Verse 19, to bring Joash and to bring Judah back to him again. Let's bring them back to the right path. Let's bring them back to the path that Jehoiada had them going down in his lifetime. But no matter what those prophets said, Joash and the people would not listen. So what will God do next? What can God do to get through to Joash when Joash is not going to listen to any of his prophets? Well, there's one card that the Lord has not yet played. And it ought to be an ace. Any guess what it is? God sends Jehoiada's son. This is verse 20. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest. So God sends Jehoiada's son to Joash and the people. And of course we know why. Joash owes his life, his place, his reign, everything he has to the father of this son. Without the father, Joash would have nothing that he has. So if that's what the father has done for Joash, then surely he would honor this son. So the Lord sends this son to Jehoiada. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But do they listen? Does Joash listen? I'm afraid you know the answer. They plotted against Jehoiada's son. And this part really gets you. By order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple, the very place that Jehoiada took Joash to save his life, is the very same place that Joash orders for Jehoiada's son to be killed. Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." Wow. What a tragic turn. Don't you wish I had stopped earlier when we could have, before all this happened? And you remember what this series is called, right? History worth repeating. From the onset of this, I warned you that Chronicles is full of stories, both good and bad. And we have to listen to them, because the person who doesn't remember history is what? They're doomed to repeat it, right? And we don't want to repeat the bad stuff. We don't want to forget history like Joash forgot Jehoiada and all the kindness that he showed. But you know what the most remarkable thing is? This history does get repeated in a way. It gets repeated in the most important moment in human history. Jesus once told a parable. Hans read it for us, about a master who owned this vineyard. And he had these tenants who worked in the vineyard. And the master one time went away for a long journey, left the tenants in charge of the vineyard when he left. You remember this parable? You remember what this parable is about? The parable is sort of an allegory of Israel's history. The tenants in the parable represent God's people. Well, specifically, they represent the leaders of God's people who have a master of their own that they're supposed to follow, someone they're supposed to look up to and honor. But they also have this responsibility that they've been given. They've been entrusted this vineyard. But just as soon as the master is gone, what do? They start to show their true colors, don't they? Do they remember the person that they ought to honor when that person is gone? Did Joash remember Jehoiada when Jehoiada was gone? And when it came time for the harvest, what did the master do? He sent his servants to collect what was rightfully his, to receive what was due to him. What did the tenants do to those servants? Well, some of them they beat, some of them they killed, some of them they stoned. All of them they rejected. Do you remember what the Lord sent Joash in the years after Jehoiada died? He sent prophets, didn't he? And one after another, their message fell on deaf ears. Joash and the leaders alongside them, they rejected those prophets. Every last one of them. So the master in Jesus' parable says to himself, there is one more thing I can do. There is one more card I can play. There's one more person I can send. Look at verse 21 of verse 37 of Matthew 21. Then the master of the vineyard sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. They'll honor my son. These tenants, they owe everything. Their lives, their place, their responsibility. They owe it all to the father of this son. Without this father, these tenants wouldn't have anything that they have. Is this sounding familiar? The vineyard isn't even theirs. So if that's what the father has done for these tenants, then surely they will honor his son. But just like Joash and the son of Jehoiada, the tenants in the vineyard in the parable of Jesus reject the son of the father. They go so far as to kill him, forgetting all of the kindness that the Father had shown to them. And that, of course, is not just a parable. It's the gospel story that Jesus, just a few chapters later, is going to live. And when Jesus told his story, he ended it with a question. Here's his question. When the owner of the vineyard gets back, what is he going to do to those tenants? Has Jesus ever asked an easier question to know the answer to? What will the master of the vineyard do to the tenants? Well, what becomes of Joash? He really gets what's coming for him. Joash couldn't choose who he was born to, but he could choose who he was going to honor. And when he dishonored Jehoiada so greatly that he would kill his son, well, Joash meets an end just like you might expect of the tenants in this parable. But the last twist is that this is the gospel story we're talking about here. And when the history of Joash gets repeated in the life of Jesus, and the master is God, and he sends his very own son from heaven into the vineyard that is his world, that master offers grace even to the wicked tenants, if they will choose it. The Apostle Paul could be called one of those tenants. He might not have been there on the day that Jesus told that parable, but he was a Pharisee, a religious leader, who did not honor the son of the master, and even sought to kill the ones that the master sent after his son into the vineyard. Paul, in his own words, calls himself the foremost of sinners. Here's someone who did not choose to honor the God who deserved it, or his son, or his prophets. But when Paul changed his life and his ways, when Paul saw his error and turned to God, his master, and to the master's only son, then we learn how God would answer that question even for a wicked tenant. We learn that he can show grace. And if God can show grace to a wicked tenant, then he can show grace to you and me. And anybody out there in this world who would turn to him and give to him the honor that he deserves. We cannot choose who we're born to, but we can choose who we will honor. And somehow the story of Joash, terrible as it is, brings us to the gospel, which tells us that we must honor the Father above all else. It brings us to a question. Will we honor the Father whom we owe everything in our lives? Will we listen to the one he sent to us? Will we welcome the Son into our lives? Honor the Son as the Master. Will we recognize that Jesus deserves all of the honor that we can give and choose to make him king over us? Maybe those are questions you need to answer today. In fact, if somebody today needs to put on Christ in baptism in recognition that he is the Lord, that he is the King, I guess in that sense we do get to choose who we're born to. Because when we're baptized, Scripture tells us it is as though we are born again, born anew, born of water and of the Spirit, born into the family of the King. We become heirs in that family. We become heirs right alongside the Son, the one true Son of the Master. Maybe it's time for somebody tonight to honor God and experience that new birth. maybe for others of us, it's time that we honor the Son in the way that we live our lives, however we may be called or challenged. Let's respond and give honor to who it's due while we stand and while we sing.